Mike, can you answer the question I asked earlier?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Nina had asked a question earlier about looking from the Jira side of the product. How do I see information on what sprint a ticket might be in? And I think I need to have an active sprint in place, but let's double check. This has in our test space a sprint 3 defined, and if we go and look at the first ticket there is a new panel down here on the lower right that's called Agile, and it tells me what completed or active sprints this ticket has been associated with. So this ticket was in Sprint 1 that ended on April 24th when I was playing around in Test Jira, and then I put it in Sprint 2, and that ended on April 25th. And once we start Sprint 3, we click the link that says Start Sprint, we would see it would now show Sprint 3 here. We also see Epic in the Agile panel, and it tells us if this ticket has been associated with an epic, what that epic is. We will now, from now on, be using this epic indicator over here on the right. This epic indicator over here on the left will no longer appear in our true Jira. This is only showing up here in the test Jira, but it's been taken away in our real Jira, because the two ways of associating tickets to epics are not compatible with each other. I have migrated everything that was typed over here has been migrated over here as of like 2 days ago, and then I think I took this off our screens once I did that migration. So I think I caught everything. Does that answer your question, Nina?
Thanks, it does.
Okay. So let's see, the next question in the chat, is there somewhere during the sprint planning phase where it shows us our estimated effort versus historical effort to help us determine how much work to bring into our sprint? I think we can see some of that through the velocity reports. So if I go back over to reports and I switch to velocity reports, there were 2 sprints in the test Jira, Sprint 1, Sprint 2, and we can see how much effort estimate we committed to and how much we completed. And we can see some graphs of that. Exactly how these metrics are calculated is probably a pretty good question, and if we're not logging work in terms of entering how much time we spent on a ticket, it's probably just burning down what the committed work was, like what the estimated work was, and it's assessing, what did you do versus not do, I guess, as opposed to how much time did it really take to complete something versus how much time did you estimate it might take. Next question, is there a way to distinguish Jiras added to a sprint after a sprint has started versus those that were added during sprint planning? Yes, if I look at the sprint report, I will see, let me switch over to a different sprint where it shows up. I can switch to, any sprint associated with that board in the sprint report. I can go look at past sprints, and I can see issues removed from the sprint. If I added an issue to an active sprint, it would show that. I just don't remember exactly how it would show that, but it would say scope change or something like that. I suppose that introduces a very good question. How do I add work to a sprint once the sprint has started? I can do that. Let's go back to our test board. I'll go back over to the plan view, and let's start the sprint. When I start a sprint, I'm asked to name it, and the sprints are not managed centrally such that every team is using sort of the same single instance of a sprint defined in Greenhopper. Every sprint is created distinctly per board. So the East Coast Sprint 3 and the West Coast Sprint 3 are technically not the same sprint. So I have proposed a naming convention in the FAQ for how we should name sprints. So you'd name your sprint, you'd specify its start and end dates. I believe it should be picking 2 weeks ahead automatically. Says one who hasn't looked at a calendar in a while. Yep, that looks right, I think. And I can start my sprint. Now, Nina, if I go back and look at this issue, I now see it's in active sprint 3. That was the question you were asking before. So let me close that. And if I were to go back to my planning board, and if I were to add work to a sprint, I would have to be the product owner or a team lead to do this, because again, by putting work in a sprint, you are changing the understanding of its priority. But I'm going to drag this item up to the sprint. It highlights in green there, and we'll see where it places it. It places it at the bottom of the sprint as a default, and then I could move it around. That was ticket 5189. If we go back to the report for the sprint, and we'll pull up our new sprint and look for 5189, it has an asterisk next to it right here. And if I hover, it says issue added to sprint after start time. There are some quirky things to know about sprints. Can you add work to a sprint from Jira? No. Can you remove work from a sprint? Yes. Again, you, I believe, have to be the product owner or the team lead to do it. But let's go back and kick 5189 out. I can click on its cog and say remove from sprint and do it. And it tells me it's been removed. I've showed you how you can end or close a sprint, but it's important to know that you cannot reopen a sprint that you've ended or closed. Greenhopper doesn't support it, and I can't help you fix it if you do it accidentally, which there's been some complaint about in the Greenhopper community. And I don't remember what the rationale was, to be honest with you. I think it may have had to do something with the notion of, making clear decisions that, you are sure you want to close said sprint, but it really doesn't accommodate for accidents that might happen. It's not forgiving in that sense. And if I'm looking at the questions, if we remove a Jira from a sprint, does it move to the product backlog? Yep, it moved right back to the backlog here, and it moved it to the beginning of the backlog. And I would assume that's not just because we pulled it off the top of the backlog. I would assume it's because it's making, I don't think it's going to sort of remember that it was at the top of the backlog before you pulled it into the sprint. So work that gets removed from the sprint probably needs to be reprioritized as necessary in the backlog. Can anyone define start a sprint? It's just leads and POs. What Greenhopper supports is the entire team working on the task decomposition process. So any work that is in a sprint or planned for a sprint can have its subtasks decomposed, and they will automatically follow the sprint determination of their parent task. But since putting work into or taking work out of a sprint is inherently an active prioritization, it's limited who can perform that function. The other question I'm seeing in the discussion list, how much padding should be placed in a sprint to handle issues like bug fixes, etc., I think is a valuable question that is not about using Greenhopper as a tool, but more about sort of best practices among PDTs, and that's probably a question I'd encourage teams to talk about and PDT leads to bring forward as a group discussion topic.